Escort coming out!
Mass murderers, spies, unrepentant killers, and hardened criminals are mostly the kind of individuals executed by the United States federal prisons. There have been over 50 federal executions carried out since 1927. In this video, we will be looking at 3 most dangerous inmates currently housed at one of the most secure prisons in the whole world waiting to be executed. Number 1. Anzorovich Dzhokhar Jahar Tsarnaev. Anzorovich Jahar was just 19 years old when he became one of the most dangerous American terrorists. He was born in Kyrgyzstan, but his family moved to the United States. He became an American citizen 7 months before the attack. Jahar, along with his then 26-year-older brother Tamerlan, orchestrated the Boston Marathon tragic bombing incident on April 15, 2013. This act of hate resulted in the deaths of 3 individuals and injuries to over 260 others. On the day of the incident, during the annual Boston Marathon, 2 homemade explosives detonated near the finish line on Boylston Street. The incident occurred approximately 12 seconds apart, causing widespread panic and devastation. The attack took the lives of 3 people: Martin Richard, an 8-year-old boy watching the marathon with his family; Crystal Campbell, a 29-year-old woman, a restaurant manager; and Lingzi Liu, a 23-year-old graduate student from China. Over 260 others sustained injuries, many of whom required severe medical attention. After the incident, Boston was set on lockdown in order to track the perpetrators. Jahar returned to his university. He was studying mechanical engineering at the University of Massachusetts, and he remained there. He even used the school gym. And his friends said he partied with them after the attacks and looked relaxed. Some reports also suggested that 2 hours after the attack, Jahar sent out a tweet urging everyone in Boston to stay safe. A few days after the bombing, the FBI released images of 2 suspects carrying backpacks, asking the public's help in identifying them. The 2 brothers headed straight to their family home, where they took the remaining weapons and left immediately. They then drove to MIT, where they fatally shot MIT police officer Sean Collier in an attempt to steal his service firearm. Later that night, they carjacked a vehicle, robbed the owner, but the owner managed to escape and ran to the nearest gas station and called the police. The police were able to track them down, and the brothers immediately engaged in a firefight and high-speed chase with the law enforcement. During this confrontation, Tamerlan, the older brother, was critically injured after being run over by Jahar, his brother, who was attempting to flee. He was taken to the hospital and subsequently died of his injuries. Jahar managed to escape after ditching the stolen car and fled on foot. The authorities released his full picture to the public, and his face was all over the media, and a massive manhunt with thousands of police officers was carried out. During the search, his uncle came on television and publicly pleaded with Jahar to turn himself over to the authorities and ask for forgiveness. He also stated that he had brought shame to their family. A few hours later, Jahar was discovered the following day, hiding in a boat in a residential backyard. The owner of the boat had come across him severely injured, and hiding, he immediately called 911. The police arrived, and after the boat started having some movements, the police started firing, but were asked to stop by a top officer. Jahar, who had been shot severely, was apprehended and rushed to a hospital in Boston where he was treated. A nurse looking after him stated that he cried for 2 days. During the interrogation in his hospital bed, he couldn't speak, but he boldly admitted to carrying out the attack and indicated that the attack was religiously motivated, that he and his brother also intended to detonate another attack in New York City's Times Square. He also repeatedly asked questions about his brother to know his well-being. Jahar was charged with 30 federal offenses, including using a weapon of mass destruction, resulting in death, and malicious destruction of property, resulting in death. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. The trial began in January 2015, and on April 8, 2015, he was found guilty on all counts. During the sentencing phase, the jury recommended the death penalty for 6 of the charges. When asked if he had anything to say before the judge sentenced him, he rose to his feet, thanked the judge and his attorney, and apologized to the victims and their loved ones, stating, "I pray for your relief, for your healing. I am sorry for the lives that I've taken, for the suffering that I've caused you, for the damage that I've done. Irreparable damage." During his sentencing, the parents and relatives of the victims begged the authorities to sentence Jahar to life without parole, stating that the lengthy appeals period would force them to continually relive that day. On June 24, 2015, a federal judge formally sentenced him to death. In addition to the victims, Officer Dennis Simond, the first officer to arrive at the crime scene after the brothers attacked and shot the MIT officer, died a year later from the injuries he sustained during the shootout. As of April 2025, Dzhokhar Jahar Tsarnaev has been on federal death row for nearly 10 years. He is incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX, in Florence, Colorado, known for housing high-profile inmates. Number 2. Dylan Storm Roof. On June 17, 2015, Dylan Storm Roof, a 21-year-old boy from Columbia, South Carolina, committed a heinous act at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, an act that shocked the nation. The Emmanuel African Methodist is one of the oldest black congregations in the United States. On the evening of June 17, 2015, Roof entered the church, and he was welcomed by the congregation. He joined the Bible study session. After sitting with the group for approximately an hour, during the closing prayer, he stood up, forcefully brought out his firearm, and opened fire on the church members. 9 African-American individuals lost their lives in this horrific act, including senior pastor and state senator Clementa C. Pinckney. 3 others survived the assault, and 1 was severely injured. After the attack, he fled the scene, but was apprehended the following day in Shelby, North Carolina. During a traffic stop, a female citizen recognized his vehicle from descriptions broadcasted by law enforcement and alerted authorities.
Something just kept telling me, there's something about that car.
She then tailed the suspect's car for some minutes until she was certain authorities were moving in for his arrest. Prior to the attack on the church, Roof had purchased a firearm with the money he got from his recent birthday celebration. When the police caught up with him after the tip-off, he was cooperative during his arrest, and during the interrogation, he confessed to the shootings, claiming that his actions were racially motivated, driven by white supremacist beliefs. His seized phones and gadgets also indicated that he had been in constant communication with other white supremacists. Initially, he was shocked by the number of victims that died from the attack, expressing little or no remorse. One of his friends also stated that the church was not his primary target, and that he was going for the school, but when he couldn't get through during the security check, he settled for the church.
He just said in 7 days, they all got 7 days, and that was on last week Wednesday, and then Wednesday coming, he shot all these people in the church. And I don't even think the church was his primary target.
Roof himself also stated that for a moment he thought of not going ahead with his plans because the church members were very nice to him, but after a while he decided to go ahead. Every evidence obtained and recorded from all his social media accounts and websites showed that Roof harbored deep hatred for the black community and was an active member of most of the white hate groups. He laughed and chuckled almost all the time during his interrogation. In December 2016, Roof stood trial in federal court on 33 charges, including hate crimes resulting in death, obstruction of religion, and firearm charges. During the sentencing phase, he represented himself and presented no evidence or witnesses. The jury found him guilty on all counts. In January 2017, After a separate sentencing phase, the jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge formally sentenced Roof to death. As of April 2025, Dylan Roof has been on federal death row for over 8 years. He is incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, which houses male inmates sentenced to death for federal crimes. In December 2024, President Joe Biden commuted the sentences of 37 federal death row inmates to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. However, Roof was among the 3 individuals whose death sentences were not commuted. In an unrelated case, after over 3 years of Dylan Roof's family not making a comment about the tragic attack carried out by their son, their daughter Morgan Roof, the younger sister to the church shooter, was arrested for bringing weapons and hard substances to school. She was given a $5,000 bond. One of the conditions of her bond that was set by a judge is that she is not allowed to return to the location of the incident, AC Flora High School. Number 3, Robert Gregory Bowers. On October 27, 2018, Robert Gregory Bowers carried out a devastating attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This assault resulted in the deaths of 11 worshipers, marking it as the deadliest attack against the Jewish community in U.S. history. On that fateful morning around 9:45 a.m., members of the Tree of Life, Dor Hadesh, and New Light congregations had gathered for their regular Shabbat services. Few minutes later, Bowers, described by eyewitness as bearded, heavy-set white male, armed with multiple firearms, including Glock .357 firearms and a Colt AR-15 rifle, entered the synagogue and opened fire on the congregants. The first 2 individuals he shot were 2 brothers, Cecil and David Rosenthal, at the main entrance, after which Bowers headed downstairs. Members of the congregation didn't initially believe that they were under an attack. The rabbi thought the noises were from a falling ceiling rack. One of the leaders of the congregation, Melvin Wax, who was described as a pure soul and a renowned leader of the congregation, who was hiding in a closet alongside other 3 members, mistakenly opened the door, and he was shot. But Bowers didn't notice the other members hiding. He moved through the building and shot anyone he came across, including the ones in the kitchen. Bowers also shot Jerry Rabinowitz, a medical doctor who was rushing out to see if he can help anyone that has been injured. After attacking the members downstairs, he headed upstairs where there were over 13 people hiding alongside Rabbi Jeffrey Myers. The rabbi successfully helped about 4 individuals to escape, but couldn't help the others. Bowers entered and also opened fire and shot over 7 people and left 1 injured. Witnesses, including Rabbi Myers, who survived the attack, testified that they heard him shouting and making statements expressing his desire to harm Jewish people. The attack lasted approximately 20 minutes before law enforcement officers arrived on the scene. During the confrontation with the force, Bowers injured 5 officers before being shot multiple times. When he couldn't endure his injuries, he surrendered and was apprehended. He was taken into custody after the attack and charged with 63 federal offenses, including hate crimes resulting in death, obstruction of religious beliefs, and the use of a firearm to commit murder. His trial began in May 2023, during which his defense lawyers sought to persuade the jury that he had significant brain damage and was influenced by mental illness or delusions. The doctor assigned to examine Bowers stated that his actions were well calculated, and he was very proud of his actions and showed no mercy during the shooting. The defense also provided a huge record of his mental health issues, including an act he carried when he was just 13 years on his mother, where he threw inflammable liquid on her and tried igniting a fire. On June 16, 2023, he was found guilty on all counts. Investigations revealed that he discharged over 67 shots out of his rifle during the shooting. The sentencing phase concluded on August 2, 2023, with the jury unanimously recommending the death penalty. The following day, a federal judge formally sentenced Bowers to death. He was the first and only inmate sentenced to death by the U.S. federal government during President Joe Biden's tenure. As of April 2025, Robert Bowers has been on federal death row for approximately 1 year and 8 months. He is incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, which houses male inmates sentenced to death for federal crimes. Given the complexities of the federal appeals process, it is anticipated that several years will pass before any execution date is set. Thank you guys for watching. Do you prefer to see these people serve life without parole or be executed immediately? Comment below.
Richard Beasley lured men with fake jobs on Craigslist and killed them. Sean Ford murdered his girlfriend's parents with a sledgehammer. Antonio Franklin murdered his grandparents and uncle with a baseball bat and set the house in fire. Terry Froman kidnapped and murdered his ex-girlfriend and her son. Clarence Fry stabbed his girlfriend to death. Larry Gappin murdered his ex-wife, her companion, and her 13-year-old daughter with a wood-splitting maul. Garrett Christopher stabbed his ex-girlfriend and their 4-year-old daughter. James Goff robbed and murdered an 88-year-old woman after delivering furniture to her home. Sean Great murdered over 5 women before his arrest in 2016. Group Scott shot and killed a bar owner during a planned robbery. Hale Delano shot a man multiple times, wrapped his body in plastic and left it in a motel room. Gerald Hand murdered his wife and friend for financial gain. James Hanna killed his cellmate while already serving a life sentence for murder. Jerome Henderson fatally stabbed his neighbor during an attempted sexual assault. Warren Hennis robbed and murdered a man who was helping his wife seek drug treatment. Danny Hill kidnapped, tortured, and murdered a 12-year-old boy on his way to a Boy Scout meeting. Timothy Hoffner and his accomplice murdered a 22-year-old man. Gary Eubanks murdered a married couple during a home burglary. Lance Hundley murdered a disabled woman, attempted to kill her mother, and set their house on fire. Percy Hutton murdered a man over a dispute involving a sewing machine and attempted to kill another. Cleveland Jackson killed a 17-year-old and a 3-year-old during a robbery. Jeremiah Jackson murdered a woman during a laundromat robbery and went on a 17-day crime spree. Kareem Jackson executed 2 men during a drug-related robbery. Nathaniel Jackson conspired with a woman to murder her ex-husband. Stanley Jalowek murdered a police informant. George Brinkman killed a mother and her 2 daughters, then murdered an elderly couple days later. Kwesi Bryan fatally shot a police officer during a traffic stop. Anthony Kirkland murdered 2 women and 2 girls. Michael Madison murdered 3 women. Ahmed Nawaz killed his estranged wife, her father, sister, and niece. David Allen murdered a woman in 1991. Anthony Apanovich was convicted of rape and murder, exonerated by DNA, but later returned to death row. Abdul Alkal murdered his estranged wife and her brother. Anthony Belton executed a convenience store clerk during a robbery. Robert Bethel murdered 2 people in a drug-related crime. Melvin Bonnell killed a man in Cleveland in 1987. Grady Brinkley murdered his 18-year-old ex-girlfriend. Samuel Moreland killed his girlfriend, her daughter, and 3 grandchildren. Lee Moore murdered a man during a robbery and kidnapping. Jonathan Monroe killed 2 women in 2001. Freddie McNeil murdered a man during a drug deal. Sean Carter killed his 82-year-old adoptive grandmother. Stephen Sepek murdered a 72-year-old man. David Chin murdered a man during a robbery and kidnapping. Curtis Clinton killed a woman and her 2 children. Timothy Coleman executed a police informant to silence her testimony. Coley Douglas killed a man during a kidnapping and robbery, then murdered a woman during a carjacking. Conway James killed a man with a pickaxe. Derek Cook killed a 68-year-old store manager during a kidnapping, robbery, and murder. Calvin McKelton murdered his girlfriend and another man to prevent testimony. Gregory McKnight kidnapped and murdered a 20-year-old woman and another man. David Martin murdered a 21-year-old man and shot a woman during a robbery. Charles Maxwell murdered a woman in retaliation for her testimony. Joseph McAlpin murdered a couple and their dog during a robbery. James Mamone murdered his 5-year-old daughter, 3-year-old son, and former mother-in-law. Jeronique Cunningham killed a 17-year-old girl and a 3-year-old child during a robbery. Vaughn Davis killed his ex-girlfriend while on parole for a previous murder. Archie Dixon killed his roommate during a robbery and kidnapping, burying him alive. Victoria Drain killed a fellow inmate with a fan motor, stomped on his throat, and drove a pencil into his eye. John Drummond killed a 3-month-old child during a drive-by shooting. Austin Gregory Myers killed an 18-year-old man during a robbery. Kessler Sapp murdered 2 young girls and a 28-year-old woman. Calvin Nayland murdered 2 men after being fired from his job. Matthew Nicholson murdered 2 teenagers during a domestic dispute. Tyrone Lee murdered an elderly couple, but no physical evidence linked him to the crime. Jose Loza killed 4 members of his girlfriend's family while they slept. Clarence Mack murdered a man during a carjacking. Michael Madison murdered 3 women between 2012 and 2013. Aaron Lawson murdered 4 family members and confessed to the killings. Carl Lindsay murdered a man. He was hired by the victim's wife to carry out the killing. Gregory Lott murdered an 82-year-old man during a robbery, setting him on fire. Carlos Sanders ordered the murder of a corrections officer during the Lucasville prison riot. Denny Obermiller murdered his grandmother and step-grandfather over stolen coins. James Derrick O'Neill killed his estranged wife in 1993. Gregory Ozzie killed David Williams to prevent him from reporting thefts committed by his girlfriend. Carrie Perez murdered a man during a robbery at a Springfield bar in 2003. Mark Pickens murdered 19-year-old Noelle Washington and her 2 children after she reported him for sexual assault. Wayne Powell murdered his estranged girlfriend, her mother, and 2 children by setting their home on fire. Walter Raglan murdered a musician during an armed robbery in Cincinnati. Jason Harry Robb murdered 2 people during the Lucasville prison riot, including a corrections officer. Donna Marie Roberts hired someone and murdered her ex-husband. Martin Rojas assaulted, stabbed, and murdered Rebecca Scott in 1987. Dwayne Short murdered his estranged wife and her friend in Dayton, Ohio in 2004. Gurpreet Singh murdered his wife, father-in-law, mother-in-law, and aunt-in-law in a shooting incident. George Skatzes murdered 2 inmates and a corrections officer during the 1993 Lucasville prison riot. Kenneth Smith murdered a couple during a home invasion and robbery with his brother. Dawood Spalding murdered his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend, leaving another man paralyzed. John Stojets murdered a 17-year-old in a racially motivated prison attack. Lawrence Landrum murdered an elderly man during a burglary in 1985. Keith Lamar murdered fellow inmates during the 1993 Lucasville prison riot and maintains his innocence. Thomas Nuff murdered his housemates and concealed their bodies in trash bags in 2017. Audrey Jones murdered Ashtabula police officer William D. Glover, Jr. in 1997. Stanley Theodore murdered a woman, her 12-year-old daughter, and another lady in 1999. Andre Williams murdered a 65-year-old man and the attempted murder of his wife during a home invasion. Juan Kinley killed his 31-year-old girlfriend and her 12-year-old son with a machete. Philip Jones sexually assaulted and murdered Susan Yates in Akron, Ohio in 2007. Christopher Whitaker abducted, assaulted, tortured, and murdered a 14-year-old girl. Hersey Wesson murdered 81-year-old Emil Varhola during a robbery. John Stumpf murdered a 54-year-old woman during a robbery at her home. James Tench murdered his mother, Mary Tench, whom he beat and ran over with her vehicle. James Worley kidnapped and murdered 20-year-old Sierra Jugan, whom he abducted while she was cycling, assaulted and killed. Jeffrey Wogenstall kidnapped and murdered 10-year-old Amber Garrett, his neighbor's daughter. James Trimble killed his girlfriend, her 7-year-old son, and a Kent State University student, Sarah Positano. Thank you for watching till the end. Which state would you love me to cover next? Comment below.